My name is Lauren Manikin-Bay. I am part of the Innovation Entrepreneurship team at Yukon University, which is kind of this corner of Northlight Innovation is the space that we proudly inhabit. As always, we have daily reminders of how lucky we are to be able to do this work on the traditional territories of the Kwanlin First Nation people and the Tom Christian Council. And as many of you have seen throughout the week, have been a part of this, the coming alive of the work that we are collaboratively doing and celebrating from the First Nations people has just been so phenomenal to be a part of. Thank you for coming and spending time with us. This event has been a long time in the making, and pardon me if I offend anyone, but we learned about this event, this idea of this event, about 6 years ago or so, when we learned about these events that are happening around the world called fuck up nights. Pardon me if I've offended anyone, but we're going for it. And it's these evening events where people come together and talk about messing up. And we have so loved the importance of that conversation. Actually was super highlighted to me years ago when one of the innovators came up, one of our entrepreneurs, our really well-known entrepreneurs, came up and said, just want to remind you how hard it is to be us. My family is counting on me day in and day out. I'm not paying the bills. I have staff counting on me. I just want to let you know that the successes and the failures are equally as important to hold space. So this is our first, and I wasn't allowed to call it that, but I'm still going to say it. This is our first fuck up lunch. It's not a night.
It's a good one.
And it is so a part of our culture in this, and on this team. We have a gong that you may have seen when you came in to celebrate the successes that we have. And we have a pig that all of our innovators and entrepreneurs that come through the space who want to talk about messing up and the mistakes and the setbacks that they go through have this pig. Go ahead, Antoinette. Show them how it. It's such a terrible sound. And just because this highlights just the culture that we really hold space for the folks that are part of what we do, both here and with our partners at UConstruct. Thank you, UConstruct, for an amazing week that we have partnered with you on, and Tech Yukon as well. So let's get started so that we're missing one of our panelists. Morgan Wienberg, who is an entrepreneur. She is particularly, folks may have seen her from the movie
Not About Me.
Not About Me, thank you. The movie Not About Me with coordinator, director, executive producer Kelly Milner, who's in the back over here. She is a child and family advocate, speaker, and facilitator visiting us from Haiti. I'm not spending much time on bios because I'm not offending anybody because of how juicy this conversation is, but they'll also each introduce themselves. Sierra Vandermeer is the new VP of Pan-Territorial Operations for the Canadian Northern Economic Development Agency. Scott, entrepreneur, staff member at Yukon U, very familiar with the ins and outs of the space that we inhabit. And Antoinette, entrepreneur, mentor, community leader. So maybe we'll jump right in with folks. So I'd love for each person here, and sorry, let me just, okay, I already said that, to introduce yourselves and then share kind of an overview of your perspective. Awesome, Morgan just showed up. An overview of your perspective on failure and what made you say yes to doing this event when I said we're getting together and talking about how we've all face planted in the past. Scott, you want to start?
Sure, I'll start. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. Thanks for your interest in the Failure Lab, or I guess we're doing it, Fuck Up Lunch. I'm CEO of a startup company called DiscoVelo. And a couple of years ago, almost 3 years ago now, partner and I, hi Morgan, welcome.
I'm sorry, everyone. I thought it was at the other campus. I'm so sorry. Oh no, I feel so bad.
You're here.
I'm
You
here.
didn't miss anything.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm starting to land, relax. Partner and I had a dream a few years ago to build on the success of his program, which put stationary bikes in classrooms to help students use exercise to regulate their emotional energy and improve their readiness to learn. It was working really well. He had bikes across the country in 1,000+ classrooms, and teachers had come to him and said, wouldn't it be amazing if there was some companion to this to track progress and keep them engaged and get more students on these bikes, because they're working for 1 or 2 students. And so we had a bit of a dream to do something digital and fun and brilliant. And the more we thought about it, the more it made sense. And the more we talked about it with other people, the more enthusiasm we got. And with the support of so many people in this room, I think most of our funders, some of our investors, and a number of our partners are here. We started building a team and building towards that dream. And we got quite a ways down the road. Ultimately, we were a victim of timing and some increasing dysfunction in the education market. So we were goal oriented on selling our product into schools. And when COVID hit, we thought, okay, well, this is a bit of a challenge, but also we know that this is going to increase demand for what we're building. And so there's going to be even more demand. And the work that we were doing to validate our market was suggesting that was the case. But ultimately what has happened is that schools and education are just in increasing disarray. And so what really makes, we have not been able to proceed with what we'd hoped to do in the way and the direction and the model that we had set up. We still have some options that we're working towards, but what makes this really, I think, a failure worth unpacking here is kind of the spectacular fashion that the scaffolding that we had built kind of all came down at once in a cascading fashion, and market, investment, support, cash flow, everything kind of all came down at once, and it didn't leave us any room to pivot. And so, we're still reverberating from that, and that was some months ago. And so, for us, we're still moving through this, but we have so many successes along the way. And that's the theme that I want to talk about, is how inextricably linked failure and success are. And I don't think that they're mutually exclusive. And nor do they just happen. Neither success or failure are accidents. They come from intention and effort, and you can be succeeding and failing multiple times a day at the same time. And so nobody always succeeds. Nobody always fails. And I think it's really important to recognize that balance and that kind of yin and yang, if we maybe kind of want to put it that way. So that's kind of how I'm setting up, and I'm carrying a lot of those successes forward in the work that I'm doing now. I work at the university, and I'm teaching working in innovation and the innovative teaching model, and really carrying a lot of what I've learned along the way. And so still working really hard to focus on the success, and for a long time bury that sting of failure, but this is very therapeutic. So thank you.
That's awesome. Morgan, folks, Scott, thank you so much. Such a great overview. We're briefly introducing and then just sharing an overview of your perspective on failure and what made you say yes when we emailed and said, do you want to come talk about face plants with us?
Well, first of all, my apologies again for messing up the location, but I'm so excited to participate in this panel today. Many Yukoners already know my story because you guys have been incredibly supportive of my journey, but I did grow up here in Whitehorse. And in 2010, after graduating from FH Collins, I went to Haiti to volunteer in the aftermath of the earthquake that happened there. And I ended up my first week in Haiti as an 18-year-old volunteering in a locally run orphanage. And the following year, I would return to Haiti and actually live in the orphanage alongside those kids for 5.5 months. And then as I started to learn the language and observe the reality of the orphanage system, I realized that those kids were being severely abused and exploited, even trafficked. And then I also discovered that the majority of those kids actually had living families who cared about them. And that was really a turning point in my life where I decided to kind of really go out of the box and found an organization to help reconnect these kids with their families and then support the families to address the root causes of the separation. And so that's really how my journey started. And here, over a decade later, Little Footprints, Big Steps, my organization has now grown. We have a team of over 20 Haitian staff who, as I'm here speaking, are out working alongside Haitian child protection authorities to reunite children with their families and then build the self-sufficiency of those families. But this journey over a decade of living in Haiti, typically I live most of the year in Haiti, again, working alongside the child protection authorities, living through earthquakes, hurricanes, civil unrest, but also having both professionally and personally a lot of growth and a lot of lessons learned the hard way, through a lot of trial and error. And for example, I mean, first of all, I went to Haiti and volunteered in an orphanage. And now I've actually dedicated my life to raising awareness about why volunteering in orphanages and supporting orphanages is damaging to children. And I'm actually helping shut down orphanages. And many of you likely know there has, Kelly Milner has actually made a documentary called Not About Me, which uses my journey to help raise awareness on these issues. And there's footage in that documentary of my 19-year-old self when I first went to Haiti. And when that film was being edited, it was so hard for me to see that footage of my younger self. I was like, this is not my way of thinking and speaking anymore. Like, who is this person? And I didn't want to have it featured, but you know, Kelly would say, this is what people relate to. And I think even the production of that film has helped me to kind of come at peace with my former self and all these different versions of myself throughout the years, because we're supposed to grow and change, but the only way we do that is through experience. And experience is not just positive experiences and successes, but experience is also the failures, the mistakes, and probably that's where we get some of the richest growth from. So I've really come to, you know, sometimes I'll just sit down and be so grateful for all of the experiences, including the negative ones. And, you know, I've just come to learn that it's something to celebrate because that's where growth comes from. So I'm excited to talk more on that. Yes.
So beautiful. Thank you as well.
My name is Sierra Vandermeer, and I feel like I'm in a bit of a different position than the other folks on the panel because when Lauren and I kind of spoke about my participation, the idea was, you know, what is the funder perspective on failure, right? Like, what are we out there looking for or not looking for? And I think it was an opportunity to share a little bit and perhaps correct some misconceptions about the comfort level with failure as a funder and what our relationship to failure is. And I want to start off by saying I personally and professionally have failed a lot, unfortunately and fortunately. So, you know, we as funders and we as people who are making decisions or deciding on what we support or don't support, we fail. I have recommended projects that have blown up in spectacular fashion and who've done damage to the communities and the people I was trying to support, you know, and it's hurt. So we have failed. It is not, you know, we make choices that are not always, don't work out the way we want. But I think sometimes people assume that we are also afraid of failure or we want to avoid failure as a funder. And so what I wanted to make sure I had the opportunity to say is we have a very complicated relationship with failure, but we're not afraid of it and we don't want to avoid it. The complexity of our relationship with failure is we are making choices that taxpayers are the ones paying for. And I take that very seriously. I know that no one in this room wants me to take their tax dollars and recommend something that doesn't result in a positive outcome. And so that's important for every person in my organization to act as stewards for taxpayers. And so we don't necessarily have the same options when it comes to failure. But at the same time, our very purpose is to be involved and to enable projects or opportunities that aren't necessarily going to work. And I'm just going to give sort of how I think a little bit about what our role is and its relationship to failure. And I'm going to use perhaps an inappropriate example, but I watch a lot of cartoons with my kids, a lot of octonauts. And one of the things you always see in cartoons where people are underwater is where the person gets chained or stuck to the bottom of the water and they're scuba diving, right? Like that's the danger all the time. And I think it's a really good example because if you are a scuba diver on the bottom of the ocean and you have a full tank and you have flippers and you have equipment and there's no reason that you're good to go, you don't need our assistance. We don't want to support projects that are inevitably going to succeed. Because if there's no obstacle in the way, it's not a good place for us to be because there's all sorts of other things out there. Like we don't need to be there. If you are chained to the bottom of the ocean, what we want to do is unlock that chain. We want to move the rock. We want to make it possible for people to reach the surface, whatever that looks like. Whether it's that your foot's stuck or you're caught in a fishing line, we want to understand what that barrier is and we want to try to get in there and fix it. But what we don't actually want to do is go and just give another tank of oxygen where you're still stuck, we're just avoiding it. And that's, for us, it's a really hard thing to diagnose and it's a really hard way to assess it. But I am personally more worried about enabling people to avoid failure. So I'm more concerned about prolonging situations where we're not removing obstacles to success, we're just delaying failure than I am of actually failing. And so, you know, I think when I was writing notes, I was like, well, great, Sierra, you don't really make any sense. You're just saying that you have to like think about a bunch of stuff and maybe I'm justifying our decision making, but but what I really want people to know is like, we don't care if things don't succeed. We aren't angry. That we are not trying to have an 100% success rate. We're not. But we are always thinking about failure in the context of, did we properly weigh the potential of success and the value of that success against what the risk was going to be, which is an art, not a science.
Thank you, Sierra.
Antoinette.
I'm gonna stand up.
Go, girl.
Yeah. I'm better on my feet. Boy, and I'll just come around. I am Antoinette GreenOliph, descendant of the Ashanti tribe of Ghana, born in the island of Tobago, Trinidad and Tobago. Grandfather, Milo Thomas. Grandmother, Pezzy Briggs. Mother, Ruby Thomas. Biological father, Egerton Aline, the man that raised me, and that was my dad. I call my dad, as PRC said. My grandmother was a cook. She was a baker and an amazing cook. My mother was a nurse and an amazing cook, and I was their shadow. I learned everything from my grandparents, my grandmother and my mother. I was the kind of kid that you would find under a mango tree reading a recipe book out of the sun. So I have chosen to be here because I actually do like the cold. April 24th, 1969, my sister and I arrived in Canada to join our mom. And we grew, did all the stuff that you do as kids. At age 21, I got married for the first time. Mind you, I had two major loves in my life. Food, which was very public, and girls, which I kept a secret. So I grew. At age 21, I got married for the first time. And I had a beautiful daughter. Got divorced. Still kept my secret. At age 30, got married for the second time. And I had my son, and I still had my secret. To me, I'm thinking I'm failing life. I'm failing all the way along, but I keep going. I am now, let's see, the age of 17, I'm in a rock band traveling through Ontario, doing the backup singing thing. That didn't work. Then I'm managing retail stores throughout. That didn't work. Well, fast forward a bit. Age 40, I have gone to a friend's 40th birthday party. And I find myself in a very interesting relationship with a married couple. And this is when I came out as a lesbian. At 40, I'm reborn. I'm a new kid. And really, I was a child and I behaved like a child. And all the women I went out with were half my age. I quit American Express. I was working at American Express. I had a really good job. I had a nice home. I had children to take care of. I never took care of them on my own. Both of my husbands are wonderful men. They're still very good friends. They love their children. I love them. That part of life was good. But I started this downward spiral. I quit my job at American Express, and now I'm like a kid in a candy store chasing all these young women, acting like a fool. Having fun, but acting like a damn fool at the same time. My son looked at me one day and said, they noticed that things started to change in the household. The food wasn't as fancy because I'm starting to run out of money. I find myself on welfare, but they don't know that. It was a fucking hard time. Sorry. Ooh, memories. 40, I am now I've taken a trip to Winnipeg, and I've gone to the Winnipeg Music Festival, and standing in line, talking to this fellow that has a bakery. And we talked for about an hour waiting for tickets. You know how music festivals are. You want to go to a concert, you got to sign up and wait and get your tickets. So we're chatting away, and he likes my personality. He says, if you move to Winnipeg, I will give you a job. You can come help me manage my bakery. And I thought, okay, you know what? Maybe there's something here, because I am doing nothing in Toronto. I'm falling apart. So I go back to Toronto, and I decide I'm going to move to Winnipeg. But my kids won't come with me. But I feel this pull. I have got to go to Winnipeg. But I ain't going to Winnipeg. I went to Saint Pierre. Saint Pierre, Jolie. It's a small French town just south of Winnipeg. My kids won't come. They're 17 and 14. They decide to stay with their dads. And I do this gut-wrenching drive from Toronto to Saint Pierre without my kids. And I start this job at this bakery. And it's going fine, but it's an hour and a half drive from Saint Pierre down to Winnipeg every day and then back. But I have another failure. I've quit this job. The space comes up in an old convent. And this space used to be a restaurant. And this is where I opened my very first restaurant, La Table des Bonnes Sœurs, June 1st, 2002. Opening day was fantastic. And then the following week, I didn't open until brunch that Sunday. Never cooked a day before in my life in a restaurant. I had no idea what it was going to be like. Opening day was great. I had time to prepare and set out the food, and things are great. Freaking disaster. I didn't know that you had to pre-cook bacon and all of those things. People are waiting forever for their food. Reviews. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm ruined. I've only just got started and I'm ruined. A friend started to tell me, okay, this is what you need to do. A fellow restaurateur, thank God, he had a restaurant just down the street, very kind, told me I need to pre-cook bacon and so on and so forth. Am I talking too long? I'm talking too long? Okay. Yeah. So I started to get some recognition because I am good at food. This is one thing that I'm comfortable with. I think it comes just from the genes, you know, Mummy and Tantan. I started to get some recognition. A woman that owned the Aurora Inn in Dawson City was also from Winnipeg. She would come to my restaurant in Saint Pierre, and she kept trying to get me to come be their head chef at the Aurora Inn. So after 4.5 years of her nipping at my heels, I thought, okay, let's go see what this North looked like. But I'm afraid because I'm thinking, what am I going to do in the North? Black lesbian in Dawson City, my life's gonna be over. I was very ignorant about the North. I worked with them for one season, but I'm a better entrepreneur than I am an employee. I bought a house, opened Antoinette's in Dawson City, did very well. But in the winter, no bumps in the seats, busted pipes, no money to deal with that. I decided to move to Winnipeg. And in Winnipeg, again, I'm a creator. All these years of doing business, I haven't spent enough time learning the ins and outs about the business itself, about CRA, about paying your taxes on time. So I end up in trouble, in big trouble. I went to go get groceries one day, and I had just checked my bank account before I left. I've got money to pay my employees, I've got money to pay my rent. I can do the groceries, and I can do all these fancy specials I want to do that night. I go up to the counter at Superstore, and I whip out my bank card, and it's declined. Why is it declined? CRA has seized my account. You can't just be creative people. You've got to pay attention to the business side of things, your cash flow, all of those things. And if you think that you cannot afford to outsource it, you can't afford not to outsource it because you end up with things like that. And again, that was a failure, and I wanted to give up. But I have this thing that in me, that's this stick-to-itness that makes me keep going. There's CRA seizing the bank account. ATCO cutting off the heat because I didn't pay on time. But I never gave up. One of my fun creatives, and I'm going to end you with this, is one day I've made the curry chicken to serve. And then I tasted it, and it was way too spicy. I'm like, oh my gosh, we're opening in half an hour. What am I going to do? I put some extra tomatoes in it, and this is how the dish Tocho was formed. Tocho is French fries with curry chicken on top, some cheese, and tomatoes. And that, you know, from failure, you can come up with some really good things. Anyways, I could go on and on forever. Don't give up. But also know there are times when you need to switch gears, know how to switch gears, but find the stick-to-itness in you and look failure in the face and say, hey, you ain't going to beat me, you know. I'm going to try something else. Anyways.
Thank you, Antoinette. What an awesome group of four. This is really special. Thank you for your intros. I have a question for Scott, and we'll follow that. But Scott, DiscoVelo not working out as planned. What did that mean and feel to you? What did it feel like? And what do you wish you had known then that you know now?
Two-part question. What did it feel like? Crushing, devastating. There's no way to sugarcoat it. It was unfun. And, you know, we went into the endeavor, particularly once we had, you know, made a decision about what kind of business model we were going to use. And that was a high growth startup, an impact startup. So this is a company that is, has an eye on rapid growth and creating products and value really quickly, and growing really quickly. So once we had kind of put, all our cards into that business model, we had some excellent mentorship, an incredible stable of mentors from around the world, actually, in a variety of different businesses. I will say we had great advice and support here from Yukon Struct. We were in the inaugural boot camp with the startup boot camp. We had great support in Yukon Struct in the co-space next door with a number of different innovators all around us. So we were surrounded by I think, great advice and great support. And so one of the things that we knew early on is that the odds of success, and I'll maybe term this as big success, right? Because there's every day, like I said, there's little successes, lots of little success, but big success. The odds of that big success are against you, against us in that kind of business model. And the statistics are out there. Startups, tech startups in particular, more of them fail than succeed. And so even knowing that, every fiber of our being, of our entire team's approach, day-to-day mindset was oriented towards that big success. And it had to be, right? To be able to think big, to visualize that big success, to pitch the company, to pitch the idea to investors, to partners, to funders. You need to ooze confidence. You need to visualize that success. And so every part of every day had us seeing that. And I see a number of other entrepreneurs here, and maybe a show of hands of people who are working really hard to visualize success every part of every day. People are there, right? And that's what it takes. And that is critically important. And so, but we also knew that, in the back, that the odds are kind of stacked against us, but being oriented with this every day put us in a place where, when all of a sudden things were obviously not headed in that direction, we were, I'll say, kind of emotionally unprepared for that, and devastating and crushing. Still recovering from that, a number of months later, and working through the processes of that. But every discussion that we had and continue to have with the network of people that I talked about who supported us, brings us back to the positives and the intention that we put into everything that we did. And and this is something that I can't stress enough, we made, with the help of boot camp, actually one of the very first things we did in boot camp was identified our values. So we did that individually, came together as a team, and identified our company and group shared values, and boiled that down to really the essence of who we are, who we were, and what we placed value on. Every decision that we made in business reflected those values, and every relationship, partnership with investors, funders, customers, colleagues, we made sure that those relationships were values aligned. And I cannot stress how important that is now, when we really need it, that emotional recovery, I don't think would have been possible. I shudder to think what that experience would be like were it not for the discussions that we've had with Sierra and her team, Lauren and your team, everybody at Yukon Struct, our investors, some of our investors here today, Yukon government. When things were kind of coming down hard, every discussion that we had with those people said, you gave it your best shot. You were operating with integrity, with intention. You're coming from the right place. The way you were doing things was was noble and had integrity, and that's it. That's what matters. And so our relationship with that particular failure is still evolving, but this is so critical to have values-aligned groups and partners to rely on when things are tough. They'll help you succeed, but they'll also really help take the edge off of those big failures and allow you to focus on the successes and carry those forward into what you do next.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So awesome. I'm going to blow up this piece of paper and I'm just going somewhere else.
Lauren, can I add something?
Please, Barry.
I'm an investor in this stuff. I just want to say it's an incredible privilege to be a part of the journey.
Yeah.
And I'm really grateful for that privilege and for that opportunity. I just want to say amen.
Thank you, Barry.
Yeah.
Morgan, can you share with us your thoughts? A couple things. So this is actually a question, I'm blowing the questions up a little bit for each of you because Scott, the answer to your question is so powerful. And we designed this for folks to walk away so that we could start this journey of normalizing failure. Because as you can tell, it's really hard and it hurts a lot. And we in this building and our funders support you in the ups and downs. And you need to know that, and your investors. So Morgan, can you share with us your thoughts and experience on why this is so hard and what we can do to normalize it for entrepreneurs, innovators, small business owners, and people in general, whether you are out making a dream come true, professionally or personally.
Sorry. I think that a lot of times failure, doing something wrong, not getting the results you want. Sometimes we're afraid of, being judged or how society will see us, people like funders, investors, but also ourselves. When I went to Haiti and ended up deferring from university as valedictorian with full scholarships to McGill, who my whole life since I was like 6 years old, saving up for university, like I was very focused and then decided actually, I'm going to move to Haiti and start an organization. And here I am over a decade later. And a lot of people ask me about that decision. And it was actually, thankfully, I had a lot of support from my family. But the hardest aspect of making that decision was the expectations I had of myself and the pressure I had on myself for that higher education. And I think that we have to be really, failure, making mistakes are these amazing opportunities for growth. Like Antoinette said, this is a sign to switch gears. It's not about giving up, but it's looking at what can we take away from this to take a different direction or change something. But if we're not careful, our own ego or insecurities can actually prevent us from turning that into an opportunity. And it's interesting because, like I said, part of why I've shared in the film, like my whole transformation, including the earlier version of myself, is because I'm hoping that when I share that with other people, they'll be more open to questioning themselves and not from the perspective of criticism or feeling ashamed, like I messed up, For example, I think Sierra mentioned, sometimes you have the best of intentions, you've made all these sacrifices, you're investing yourself, and you find out that you're not actually having the impact or results that you want. I was always so motivated by my personal connection with these kids and just wanting them to have everything that I had in my childhood. And then somewhere along the line, I realized my role isn't to be the kids' parents. And I used to love like for them to call me mom and everything else. And I realized like, hey, my role isn't to be their parent. My role is to connect them with their parents.
Yeah.
And my role isn't to provide them with everything they need. My role is to empower their parents to provide them with everything they need. And when I'm playing that role, I'm actually undermining them from building that connection with their own family. And similarly, I'm, as I'm advocating against the orphanage system or against institutionalization, I do have conversations with people or groups who've been funding or volunteering at orphanages for years. And here I'm trying to tell them this is actually harmful to the kids and, perpetuating the exploitation of those kids. And some people or organizations are like, wow, how can we help the kids differently? So we're actually supporting them, and they're willing to support these kids in their families. And then there's other organizations or people who just shut down and want to keep doing what they've known, which was shocking to me, because I can understand if you're, it's ignorance or you don't know that it's harmful. But I think it's a hard pill to swallow. And it doesn't feel good, like you're describing. It doesn't feel good when you're at that point of realizing maybe you've done something wrong, or again, it's not having the impact that you want. But if we can have the self-awareness, first of all, to recognize that something's not working here, that's the first step into improving and growing and gaining experience through that. And so if we can be really conscious of like our own ego or insecurities not getting in the way of, again, this whole concept that it's not about me, that's actually going to be helpful to you and help you grow and be more successful if you can look at this as, okay, how can I learn from this? What lesson is this showing me? Like, how can I improve? And it's humbling, and it also brings, so much power to the amount of growth that you can have. So a lot of it is in your mindset and how do you view the situation that you're in.
Awareness.
Exactly, the self-awareness.
Thank you so much.
Same question?
Same question, or go with your gut.
Well, you know what, and I am not a politician, I'm a bureaucrat and a public servant, and I take my role as a public servant very seriously, and that what I'm here to do is give fearless advice and loyal implementation at every turn. But part of my answer is going to be a bit political, and I think it's an interesting question about why are we afraid of failure? Why are we, and why is my organization afraid of failure sometimes? And I think we have to acknowledge that we're afraid of failure because people are nasty. I'm going to say that people can be mean about it. And that's a very probably simplistic thing to say, but I would also say, how many of us, when someone we don't really agree with, has made a mistake and failed, how many of us are like, see, look, I cannot believe they did that. They're such idiots, right? Who kind of relished in the failure of it. And so I have done that. And so I am also afraid of failure, because I can only imagine that if I have looked at someone and said, I cannot believe they would do that, what a terrible decision, that someone's looked at me and said the same thing. And so that makes you a little bit, it sets us all up to try really hard to avoid failure. And I do think that it's something to, I understand why, for example, the politicians that we serve don't have a difficult relationship with failure. And I understand in all of my conversations with various ministers over many, many years you know, every single one of them on an individual basis, you can say, this has got some risk. Do you want to do it? And they'll say, yeah, like I'm willing. But boy, they can get attacked pretty harshly when something goes badly, you know. And I get the fun task sometimes of sitting on committees and answering committee questions. And, you know, when someone can find a failure, they definitely, if they're looking to undermine or to sort of, if they want to, they can use that failure in a way that's quite destructive. And so, you know, I think the reason that I'm saying this is because I think we all need to be a little bit self-aware in what all of our role is in failure avoidance. And I think it's sometimes, I find it helpful to say it out loud in order to also remember, you know, am I making this choice because I'm afraid that someone's going to come after me later, or am I making this choice for a really strong principled reason? And it's a hard one. And I've been accused in my day, perhaps rightly, perhaps wrongly, of like, well, it doesn't hurt you. You still have a job the next day. You still go to work. You still get your paycheck. Like, it, you know, this doesn't matter to you. And I've often felt sad when I hear that, because it does matter to me. And I absolutely, you know, to hear Scott, like, and it's kind of funny, we've got a Morgan between us, right? Like, you know, we were funders with Scott. You know, there's a piece of me that my heart breaks a little bit when Scott talks about it, because there's this part of me that kind of is looking at Carly out of the side of my eye going like, should we have done something? Like, did we make a mistake? Did we, you know, did we do something? Like, did we make things worse? Should we have done something different? Like, we don't take any pleasure out of watching the people that we've worked with and cared about not succeed. And I get that it's not the same impact, but it hurts. And I think that as entrepreneurs and as, you know, as entrepreneurs and as investors, I think it is important for people to know that, is that, you know, that there is, you know, we are trying to avoid failure because we don't want to get professionally reprimanded. I'm not going to lie, I don't want to get fired. It's not something I'm looking for. So I'm trying to make very good decisions. But I don't want spectacular explosions. But also, you know, that we don't relish in anyone else's failure, and that we take it very seriously, and that we care deeply, and that it's, you know, we're all trying to be supportive of, like, that we're kind of all in this together in a lot of ways. And I mean, I will say with Scott, I remember a couple months ago, I called you on the phone because we had a press release coming out.
Yep.
And DiscoVelo was in it. And we had a conversation because it was like, do we leave this in? Do we pull it out? You know, Scott was very forthcoming and said, yeah, there's some things happening right now and we're trying to pivot and stuff. But, you know, that's an interesting choice, and we left it in and we announced it. But I mean, it's hard because I don't want to put something in the media that's just going to end up with someone coming back and attacking us as an institution. I don't want to put something in a press release where they go after Scott. I don't, like, you know, we're protecting ourselves and others. And I think that's you know, it's part of what we're all journeying together, right? And, you know, I'm sure that, you know, for the same thing you're saying, Maureen, like when you saw that, you were like, don't put that on there. Like, what will people say about me?
To add on to that, just the whole time you've been talking, what's been in my mind is like, again, back to this kind of the self-awareness about, which is like, you're talking about, okay, we're trying to protect ourselves. Like, we don't want people to see our failures. And to me, it's like, okay, try and think about it this way. Instead of trying to hide your failures being the protection, the protection is that you have the comeback of, yes, you know what? Yes, that did not work out, or I was doing this wrong. And look at how I'm doing it differently now. Look at what I've learned from that. And so you don't have to try and hide it anymore because you've learned from it. You've changed from it. And I've just learned like, that's my best way to protect myself from people criticizing me is, yes, I'm totally willing to acknowledge things that have not worked out. And, you know, at the same time, recognizing the way that I've learned from that and put it into application instead of trying to cover it up.
And Sierra, if I could just add to that too, I think the, you know, you're talking about a lot of the hard, challenging, you know, mechanical decisions around these projects and endeavors. And there's an underlying theme of risk here, right? And, you know, the word hasn't really come up that much, but it could be a whole panel discussion on risk assessment, risk appetite, risk aversion. The more we do this, the more we normalize failure, the more as a group, as a community, as a population, the more risk averse we can be. And there's no growth without risk, right? The more we can grow, the more risk averse we can be, the more we can grow as individuals, as a community, as a group of people, and as a population. So I never answered the last part of your question, which is, or you asked Morgan, what can we do? You're doing it. This is it right here. In my view, you're already doing the most important things to help, which are these kinds of discussions. And when you said people can be mean, they can, but not here, not this community, this ecosystem. I'm not crazy about that term, but this community of funders and supporters and entrepreneurs are not mean. So be here, grow here, surround yourself with these people, because this is your crew here. And these are the people who are creating that space and building that safety, that network and that safety net to allow you to be bold and to think big and to take big swings.
Lauren, can I say two things before you go to Antoinette? Because I want you guys to know what working for Sierra is like. It's crazy. It's fantastic. But whenever you go to her and say, look, this project has gone fucking sideways. And she's like, so what are we going to do? It's never go get the money back. It's never like when Scott was talking about failing with integrity, and that's what we look at. Why did it fail? And that's where Sierra makes us go back, which we now do it naturally, but we know we have the freedom to go to her and say, look, this project went sideways. This is what I recommend. I've talked to Scott, and this is what Scott wants to do to move on from his failure. And she makes us do that. And so I think that's really, I want you guys to really understand that she walks the talk. Like she really means what she's saying out there.
Very good. You're probably going to ask me something else, but
I'm giving up on you.
No, I just wanted to add to this. Perhaps there are many cultures that don't have ego in their makeup. And I think that if we can all, as you say, this culture right here is not a mean culture. And maybe what we need to start doing is to start thinking more of a we instead of a me or an I. Maybe we start changing the word failure. Maybe we don't call it failure, because it really never is failure. You always come out learning something.
Yes.
I have never not gone through something and not come out on the other side better. Anyways.
Yeah.
That's great.
I didn't have any more. I was just gonna ask,
Okay.
why is it so hard in normalizing it? But I think it's a beautiful answer. It's 105 and true to our word. We're not only normalizing failures, but we're also normalizing swear words. Carly. So I wonder if anybody has any questions. And then there's one final question just to close her out. But would anybody like to ask this incredible panel anything? Yeah.
Hi, I'm the social net person who will ask a question around support for failure. When funded by public organizations, are there supports in place that, let's say, CanNor in this situation, can ensure that the project that was funded and is headed towards failure, or is failing or has failed, that the people involved who are going through the motions of that failure, to ensure that they're able to sit on a panel and feel like it's not a failure, that it's an opportunity for growth, that they get the support that may be needed to be able to be in that position and not stay in the world of failure and then would never be eventually seated where you are now.
Yeah, I mean, okay, I think it's an interesting question. So, I would say that what we, as public funders, again, we have a responsibility for taxpayer dollars, and I never want to ever give the impression that we don't take that seriously. But I mean, I think what we try to do is when we're looking, in most cases, someone has pitched a project to us. They've said, we want to do X, and we want to do it because we think that it will result in this. And what we try to do is really take the perspective that, is the intended result still what everyone's aiming for? Like, are we taking a different pathway? Are we adjusting? Did we think we were going to build this kind of widget and we're building that kind of widget? Did we think we were going to go to this kind of market? We're going to that. And to try to be really adaptive with people. And so as people in their projects have failures, what we as government we try to do is say, okay, if you have to learn and change, talk to us so that we can figure out how we have to pathway that. Including sometimes, I mean, I don't have final say on things. So I need to say, do I need to go back and get this reapproved? Like, is this still the same thing that I asked our minister to agree to? But I think the second part of your question was like, if we fail, like, how do we still have the support system or to continue in the entrepreneur space and things like that? And I think that one's maybe a bit more complicated. One thing I hope to heck that we do is we don't shame failure or punish failure or, any of those things. But I'm going to give a perhaps a funny answer in that we try to support places like Yukon Struct and I&E to create the framework, the ecosystem, the environment that then can support people at different points during their journey, which might include some low points. Mm-hmm. And so, no, we don't really have a mechanism to say, okay, Lana, that didn't work. We've got your back to figure out the next step. But instead, what we're trying to do is create a little mini universe of entrepreneurship, which provides those supports and that advice and those different services that sort of let people, that kind of maybe are a bit of a trampoline on the parts where you're heading downwards. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that was a good answer.
Yeah.
I think that's working, Sierra.
Yeah,
I was looking at you. So I&E has a very interesting role in this community ecosystem entrepreneurial universe because we are specifically mandated by CanNor and by Government of Yukon Economic Development to focus on the really, really early stage. I don't know if this is even physically possible or going to work or does it break the laws of physics, but I have this idea and it could be really great if it works. I just don't know if it will or what I need to do to make it work. So we expect failure because we're working at that very early stage. We proportion of our projects to fail than maybe CanNor or ECDEV does with their funding pots. And we look at that as an investment in the individual, in the innovator or the entrepreneur. And this is what we've heard from all four of you is, what did you learn from that experience? And so it's not a failure, it was an investment in your learning and your growth. And you might come back to us with another project, or you might not come back to us. You might go to CanNor, you might go to ECDEV, you might go somewhere else, you might fund it with finance or loans or investment or whatever, or you might not become an entrepreneur, but use that learning somewhere else in your life. It's never lost, it's an investment.
That's great.
Remind me to give you a hug later.
Oh, hi.
Great. My question is, what I'm hearing from this lovely panel here was kind of a dichotomy between, I think, failure, quote unquote, from interpersonal failure, like hubris or attention to detail, versus failure that's kind of done to you by the system or by others. Is there a strategic response to that in that sort of difference? If it's really kind of down to you, that you're not really up to the challenge versus other things that are happening to you. And do you ever change your values in order to get into the game and to fight? You know, they don't call it fluffy rabbit tank, they call it shark tank, right? So, I know we're all warm and fuzzy here in the space, so you're kind of struck, but you ever change your values, say, no, I'm gonna fight that and we're gonna kick that? And can you do that if it's not just only your own personal feelings?
Awesome question, Morgan. Do you take that?
I have an element of response. I think when it comes to values, it's important to keep your values. And which brings me back to what Scott was saying in terms of, okay, maybe this didn't work out, but you did it with integrity. You respected all your values. Like, you can feel at peace with that.
Yeah.
I've definitely had to deal with situations where it's, you know, there's nationwide lockdown and there's gangs controlling the fuel stores in the country. And that's not necessarily in my control. You know, it's not my fault. You know, school hasn't been able to open yet in Haiti this year. That's not my fault. But time and time again, and actually I have colleagues who are, you know, psychologists working in the same context, and it's all comes down to like, okay, focus on what you can control. Focus on what's in your power. And there's a lot of, because you can also look at that and it so easily get discouraged if you're looking at failures or contexts that are so difficult based on things that are not in your control. And I think it's really powerful within that context, which might be really challenging. There are small wins that you have. What can you do? Even if it's not all that you want to do, maybe you can't do all that you want to right now. And it's just a matter of postponing it. But that doesn't mean that you have to give up on that. It doesn't mean that you're not pushing forward at all. So in those contexts, I think definitely focusing on it, just any difficult situation like that, whether it is something that I did that didn't work out or something that's out of my control. Maybe I have to cry about it or be upset about it for a little bit. And honestly, the time over the years has been reduced, but it's important to feel that. And then my next thing is like, okay, I've felt that now. What can I do, or what can I learn? What is in my power right now? And if it's something that's in the past, again, the question is, what can I learn from this moving forward? And if it's something that is current or in the future, it's like, okay, what can I do? So focusing on what's in your power.
You want to add to that?
I will. Yeah. Thanks, Travis. And Travis was my neighbor over here at Yukon Struck. Apologize for all the loud phone calls with tin walls over there. That, you know, what you alluded to of, you know, personal vis-a-vis group or project, you know, it's a constant calculus. I think every moment of every day, you're trying to figure out how you and your own ego and values and everything fit within what you're trying to do as a group and as a team. And that's just, you know, inevitable dynamics of working with other people towards a group goal. And so I don't know if it's worth focusing on trying to resolve that because it's never done. But your second question, do you change your values to do X? And I would definitively say no. Like I talked about earlier, put that work in very early on. If it's not the first thing you do, it should be one of the very first things you do, is figure out your group values. Lock those down, because those will be your North Star as you inevitably encounter obstacles and challenges every moment of every day. You will have to go back and go, why are we doing this? And what are we trying to accomplish? And we had a pretty substantial chunk of investment on the table at one point, but it was not coming from a party who was values aligned with us. And so we said no.
Yeah.
And in retrospect, that money could have made the difference for us. And ultimately, it may have just extended the inevitable. But it would have kept us going for a while, but we said no. And in retrospect, I can't imagine how much harder what we went through would have been if we had been indebted to that particular party for that amount of money. And so don't compromise on those values, regardless of how shiny that thing is in front of you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Scott.
I think Barrett's really anxious here to say something, but I really just want to echo what Scott and Morgan has said. And if you're at a place where you're questioning whether you're on the same page with your group, then you need to go back to the beginning and start again and sit down and have some conversations.
I just want to, can I say one quick thing? Because there was one part of what you asked that I don't think we've quite touched on, which is this idea of, well, actually, sorry, Morgan did. Failures, the dichotomy between failures that are outside of your control or circumstances outside of your control versus circumstances within your control. And I do want to say that I don't think that a failure that occurs because of something outside of your control it needs to be treated differently than a failure that occurs that's within your control. And I just want to be clear that, like, if we as funders are looking at something failed, like, it's not that it's okay because something external happened. And it's not okay because somebody made the wrong choice and they could have made a different choice. Or, it's not okay because they just weren't as good at this as they needed to be. Like, I would be very careful to suggest that a failure is better or worse because of how it came about. Because again, then I think what it's saying is, like, it's really not okay to fail because you've made a choice. It's only okay to fail when something else happens that you don't expect. And I think both are equally valid and okay and valuable.
Barrett.
Yeah, let's do one more question and we'll close.
Sharing these stories is really, really important. It relates to the earlier point that they need to be shared. One of the things we get embarrassed to share, that it didn't work out. And I know, Scott, when you called me, it was really hard to call me, and we had a really great conversation. And I was grateful for it. And I would never invest in anything that would jeopardize a friendship with the person that went south. If it's going to jeopardize a friendship, I'm not going to make an investment. But the other thing is that I think this whole notion of failure needs to be unpacked. It's already been said a number of times that, if we've learned something, then it's not really a failure.
Right.
And if it's couched in the sense of learning, and you can do the research on this, but there are many organizations that have figured this out, and they actually celebrate learning experiences. Okay? And you talk about ringing the bell and you have the pig up there, but they would have the bell. That why would we ring the bell here? We really learned something really precious and valuable in this thing. And the other thing is that it's a time scale issue, because at any given moment, Antoinette, sharing your stories, there are very moments there where it felt like the whole world had collapsed and everything had come to an end. But looking back now, you're able to say, It's all part of a longer journey, okay? And most entrepreneurs, really successful entrepreneurs, very few find any that haven't had real moments where they felt like the whole thing had gone to a shit show. And I have one of my, a very dear friend who's a very successful entrepreneur with a business all over the world. But I met him at the cusp of the thing taking off, and then the great sort of recession happened. And he, as he would say, I went from being worth $12 million one day, and the next day I was worth $12.46. Okay? And he tells the story of the assessor coming in and looking at his wife's wedding ring to figure out how much value he could get from his wife's wedding ring.
Wow.
Now, he had to start over, but that was a part of where he is now, was a part of the fruit of that. And so failure needs to be put into a context of these kinds of experiences. And in the end, it's looking back at my lifetime, and I see lots of things that at the time felt like they were terrible. But I look back and say, that's partly how I became who I am. That's how Antoinette became the woman that we were all clapping for a few minutes ago. So,
Thank you, Barrett. Brilliant. Awesome. Thank you. I'd love to ask each of you, Scott, please start. Just kind of one piece of advice or closing words, or what do you want to leave on the table until we do this next time?
Good, because I want to do this again.
Yeah.
Because this is an evolution. I have so many bits of advice, but I want to start by answering the second part of an earlier question that I didn't answer, which is, what do I wish I knew now that I didn't know then? I would not want to know how much this stung. Okay, that is one thing. And so I don't know if I'm actually doing you a disservice right now to tell you this, but I think what I would have wanted to know is just some of the mechanics, so some nuts and bolts stuff. We incorporated a company, a high growth company. We had a great lawyer, great investors and mentors who were all, sending us onwards and upwards. And I would have really benefited from knowing and understanding and being able to implement early on some off ramps. And I want to call out Caitlin here. I think she's just gone, but Caitlin and Lauren and Alicia, a previous project officer with INE, really helped with this. And for those moments where I felt like, and often did, kind of put my head in the sand and then eventually yarded myself out and went and talked with them, I always felt better afterwards. And regardless how dire kind of things were, I almost always came away with more money and a worthy objective to go forward and build on the learning, Barrett, because you're absolutely right. Failure and success come from, what they share is that they come from effort and intention, and there is always learning from that. And so that's what's different than just sitting on the couch and not doing anything, right? And so, but those off ramps that Caitlin kind of talked about, which would have been nice. I would have liked to have known more about the mechanics of dissolving a company, right? We learned in boot camp, here's what you need to do to start a corporation and build a company, right? And I think a really worthy discussion would also be, okay, and as all of your fibers of your being are oriented towards that growth, here's what you need to know if things do kind of go south. Here's a few things that you could have in place, right? So those would have been good. And those having that understanding of what that process looks like would have been really helpful, because what happened when things kind of imploded, on using all these disaster terms, when this all kind of came down, we had to learn on the fly what happens when you've been constantly looking over here and now all of a sudden someone's turned your shoulders 180 degrees and you're going this way. There's a whole bunch of considerations, tax implications, corporate dissolution processes, legal considerations, investment mechanism machinations, and to have to learn about all of that under duress was hard. right? And so having an understanding of that off ramp and what that could look like, and knowing that that was there, like the inflatable slide out the door of the plane, knowing those instructions ahead of time, having that talk from the flight attendant about if things go sideways, here's how it's going to go. Knowing that in advance would have made that a lot easier, being able to deal with that.
Makes it less scary.
Makes it less.
You face it head on.
Oh yeah. It was terrifying having to go from all like realizing like, oh my God, I don't think this is going to work. And we have liabilities. We need to discharge our liabilities and our assets to dissolve a company. What is that? Terrifying. So having that, knowing that in advance would have been helpful. And those are really just, those are easy things to tweak, I think, in the curriculum and the learning and all of that here. Yes, Kat.
So I hear you. Boot campers, raise your hand. Yeah, and Caitlin was really, she was gonna come for a session, so she's like, no, I have to be here today. So we hear you.
Awesome. Awesome. That's great. Pieces of advice.
Yeah.
But I did have a few things here. So stay in this community here and rely on the people who are supporting you. Because without exception, every time I just felt like turtling and hiding and keeping the blinds closed, and I went and had those hard discussions, I always felt better and always came away with some more hope and a bit more light in the path forward. So always have those discussions. Do not be afraid when things are going sideways to talk to the people who have been in your corner all along, because it will inevitably make it easier. Go for it. Don't let this discussion dissuade you from going for it, from taking that big swing. Visualize success, but prepare for the alternate path in the shadows, right? And I think that's, again, a tweak. And it's a risk assessment, right? Always be, a lot of what I heard early on was, where are the risks? But I think that chorus could be a little bit louder. And that process of evaluating risk, I should have known. In my previous life, I worked with a lot of engineers. I did a lot of formal risk assessments and failure modes and effects assessments for mining projects. And I failed to apply that methodology to this business. And I could have and should have seen that coming. And so everybody here, if you've got the wherewithal to start something and you're able to convince these smart people here who fund projects, then you are smart and you have life experience that's valuable, and use everything that you've learned, bring it to bear on what you're doing here, because it's going to require everything that you know and more, and you'll be learning every part of every day, and be ready for that. There's way more than one piece of advice.
Very much.
There's an organization that Little Footprints, Big Steps partners with called Lumos. And one day I was speaking with the CEO of Lumos, who is a mentor for me. And she said something that has really stuck with me and made a difference for me in difficult times, which seems really simple, but it's just that both in your personal and professional lives, there will always be ups and downs, which seems so simple, but it's just normalizing the fact that you're not always going to feel on top of the world and happy and like everything is going great in life. There will be times when you feel that you're doubting yourself and feel down and feel like giving up and like a failure. And that's not the end of the world. That's just part of life. And soon there will be, a high point again. Both points are temporary. So it's just really helped me in those difficult situations to know it's not the end of the world. It's not time to give up. It's just getting through this low point and getting on to the next higher point.
That time scale Barrett talked about.
Yes, yeah.
Thanks, Morgan.
I'm just going to reiterate something Scott said and say it from the opposite side, which is like my one piece of advice is talk about it, like engage about it. Don't like the quicker that as a funder, we know that there is an unexpected change in risk or the potential for something to, the earlier we know, the faster we're equipped to help manage it. And if we find out after it, we can't, the number of tools we have at our disposal is just so much less.
Mm-hmm.
So talk about it early. And I do love what you said, Scott, because you solved a great mystery for me today, because you talked about like how important it was to just focus on the success, like visualize it. And sometimes I've said to my folks around the table, like, I don't get it. Like, don't they see the, like, you know, don't, like, it's so hard sometimes when you're like, what do you think could go wrong? And people are like, nothing could go wrong. It's all going right. We are, and you're like,
We're a rocket ship.
I am not positive, but I think it really helps my perspective, which is that's a mindset you must have. And so, you know, when I go back to my office, I'm going to talk a bit to my folks, which is like, how do we ask the question differently to not force people to get out of the mindset of success, but still elicit that understanding of you know, where the off ramps could be. Again, without making people break the visualization that is important for them.
Good stuff.
Awesome.
Advice. I wish there were starting a business 101. I'm sure there are many things, but here's what would have really worked for me. I needed to know CRA's number. I needed to know how to do your payroll. I needed to know that I need to track my expenses, and all of those little things you need to pay attention to. Yeah, you've got this high about starting this new thing, this new business, but it's really important that people that come to you or whomever, make sure they know the beginnings of those things. And I don't know how we do that, but that's one thing. Now the other, the advice is to stick with it. You've got to find that stick to itness. You can't give up on the first down. And that's really, and talk. If you're having difficulty, do not close the blinds and run and hide. You need to do the tough stuff and face people. Because really, it's just another person. They're not going to bite your head off. You might feel really shitty for a moment, but you'll feel so much better if you just face it. Face it, man. Yeah.
Antoinette, I love you. Sierra, I love you. Morgan, Scott, I love you guys. Thank you. I'm looking ecosystem, even though we don't like that word, they like nail it.
And thank you, Lauren, and everybody else here for creating this space. And this is critical, and been talking about it for a while. Yeah. And I'd be more than happy to do this again. I'll do this on a regular basis.
Thank you, folks, for sailing with me and making this a half an hour, 35 minutes longer than